Scotland. Late autumn 1939. A cold wind sweeps across the damp moorlands of Perthshire, carrying the smell of wet peat and rain-soaked grass. Inside a dim, drafty military barracks, a group of young British soldiers kneel on the floor, cutting strips of burlap, dyeing them in buckets of mud and tea. Their uniforms are already filthy, but the task before them is far stranger. They are learning to disappear. At the far end of the room stands an older man in a plain wool coat, not a soldier, a civilian. His hands stained with glue, his sleeves dusted with bits of hair and netting. He is a wig maker from Edinburgh, quietly demonstrating how to knot threads and weave strands into rough mesh. The soldiers call it madness. He calls it patterning. In a war that hasn't yet reached its full fury, this peculiar craftsman is about to give the British Army one of its most quietly lethal innovations, the camouflage suit that would let a sniper vanish at 50 yards. By the autumn of 1939, Europe was holding its breath. The Second World War had begun, but on the Western Front the guns were strangely silent. This uneasy period, known as the Phony War, gave Britain time, not much, but enough to prepare for the storm that was coming. Across training grounds from Salisbury Plain to the Scottish Highlands, the British Army began to rethink how it would fight in a modern mechanized conflict. Old tactics of open field movement were now suicide under machine gun fire and aerial reconnaissance. Visibility meant vulnerability. Camouflage, once a niche curiosity for hunters and gamekeepers, suddenly became a matter of survival. Snipers in particular faced the impossible task of remaining unseen in a battlefield watched by binoculars, aircraft, and steel optics. At that time, the British Army had no standardized camouflage system for individual soldiers. Most wore khaki, a color designed for dust, not grass. The only men with practical experience in concealment were Scottish gamekeepers and rural poachers, accustomed to blending with the moors while stalking deer. It was from this unlikely background that the idea of the ghillie suit began to re-emerge, a tradition dating back to the Scottish Highlands of the late 19th century, when estate gamekeepers known as ghillies wore hand-woven cloaks made from netting and strands of jute to hide from their prey. Now, as Britain stood on the edge of a total war, a small group of military instructors in Scotland began experimenting with this forgotten art. Their challenge was clear: transform an old hunting trick into military-grade camouflage capable of fooling German optics, trained spotters, and the deadly precision of Wehrmacht sharpshooters. But they lacked expertise in one crucial detail: the art of weaving natural patterns into fabric. That knowledge would come from a man who had never held a rifle, but who understood how to mimic life itself in the strands of a wig. His name was James Crighton, a 47-year-old wig fitter and theatrical hair specialist from Edinburgh. Before the war, his life had been spent under the soft yellow glow of theater lamps, not the gray sky of military grounds. He supplied wigs and hairpieces for stage actors, crafting them with meticulous precision so that under the scrutiny of an audience, not a single thread looked false. When war came, his trade slowed. But one of his clients, a Scottish officer attached to the newly formed sniper training program, remembered Crichton's uncanny ability to blend color, texture, and motion into something that fooled the eye. In late 1939, Crichton was summoned to a small training detachment near Dunkirk. His task sounded absurd: help design a uniform that could make a man invisible against the earth. The early British attempts were crude: coarse burlap capes and fishing nets stitched onto uniforms, too heavy, too bright, too symmetrical. Under sunlight or through a German scope, they looked like what they were: men trying to hide. Crichton studied the problem as an artist would. Nature, he told the soldiers, never repeats. Grass bends in different directions. Moss grows unevenly. Shadows are irregular. To disappear, one must copy that chaos. Using his wig-making skills, he began weaving hair-like jute strands into random, uneven knots over a netted base. The pattern was never consistent. That was the secret. It broke the human outline, dissolving the soldier's form into the background. At first, many dismissed his methods as suicidal. The loose fibers could catch fire or snag on branches. But when the men crawled into the tall grass wearing Crichton's prototype, even at 50 yards their bodies vanished into the field. The effect was eerie, unnatural, and perfect. From a theatrical trade came a battlefield revolution, one that would soon spread from the Scottish moors to the frozen forests of Norway and the burning sands of North Africa. The success of Crichton's pattern was more than a visual trick. It represented a psychological shift in how soldiers understood the battlefield. The ghillie suit was not simply camouflage, it was transformation. A man wearing one ceased to look human. He became part of the ground. A whisper in the grass, a shadow that breathed. For British snipers, this invisibility brought both power and burden. The first angle is human. Snipers trained under harsh discipline, isolated from the rest of their units. They learned patience bordering on madness. To lie motionless for hours, face pressed into damp soil, waiting for a single, perfect shot. The ghillie suit, soaked in sweat and mud, became a second skin. Some men claimed the disguise changed them, that wearing it stripped away identity. They no longer felt like soldiers, but like predators, unseen, unfeeling, detached from the noise of war. Crichton's weaving had given them more than concealment. It had given them anonymity. The second angle is technological. Every strand, every knot in the netting had purpose. Crichton experimented with natural fibers, dyes, and textures that reflected light differently under overcast skies. Burlap was boiled in tea or stained with peat water to dull its brightness. Soldiers learned to attach local vegetation before each mission. Grass in the highlands, pine needles in Norway, or scrub in France. This adaptive design made each suit unique to its environment. German spotters, trained to look for movement, often overlooked what seemed to be patches of ordinary terrain. And finally, the moral angle began to emerge. To kill unseen was efficient, but also deeply unsettling. Officers debated whether the ghillie suit made sniping too impersonal, too detached from the soldier's moral sense. Yet on the battlefield, survival left no room for philosophy. Crichton's design worked, and that was enough. From art to engineering, from human instinct to moral weight, the ghillie suit carried layers of meaning few could have foreseen in 1939. The fourth angle was tactical. In early field trials, the ghillie-clad snipers changed the rhythm of reconnaissance warfare. Before, spotting enemy observers required risky movement, crawling, peeking, repositioning. Now, snipers could remain undetected for entire days. During mock exercises in 1940, British instructors discovered that standard lookouts could not identify a ghillie sniper even at distances under 50 yards. What made the pattern so effective was its irregular depth. The layered jute fibers broke up light and shadow, creating micro-contrasts that fooled both the naked eye and the scope. This discovery shaped the very concept of concealment in British doctrine. Soldiers were now trained to think in terms of distortion, not disguise, to manipulate how the enemy perceived shape, texture, and motion. Then came the enemy angle. The German army, known for its sharp discipline and advanced optics, soon took note. Reports from Norway and France described phantom shooters whose positions could not be traced even after multiple volleys. In response, the Wehrmacht began experimenting with their own camouflage smocks, notably the here splitter Tarnmuster and later Platinenmuster patterns. Yet none achieved the same organic unpredictability as the British ghillie netting. The Germans mastered pattern printing, the British had mastered pattern breaking, and lastly, the cultural angle. Crichton's invention bridged two worlds, the artistry of theater and the brutality of war. His weaving table, once used to craft wigs for actors, became a bench for soldiers learning to vanish. That intersection, between illusion and survival, revealed something profound about the human response to conflict. The same creativity once used to entertain now served to conceal, deceive, and kill. By the spring of 1940, small units of British and Commonwealth snipers were deploying with these handmade suits, their designs spreading quietly from camp to camp. Each was a work of patience and fear, a tapestry of survival stitched by hand. And soon, that patience would be tested under fire, as Europe erupted into full-scale war. April 1940, Norway, the first true test. When German forces invaded, British and Norwegian troops scrambled to hold mountain passes and fjord valleys against overwhelming odds. Visibility was everything, and death often came from whoever saw first. Among the British detachments sent north were small reconnaissance and sniper teams equipped with the earliest forms of Crichton's ghillie suits. It was here in the frozen birch forest near Narvik that the invention proved its worth beyond question. The snow-covered landscape was a sniper's nightmare. White glare, thin trees, nowhere to hide. But the British snipers, having adapted their suits with strips of bleached canvas and shredded cloth, melted into the terrain like ghosts. German scouts reported taking fire from invisible men, unable to locate the shooters even after careful scanning with binoculars. Some believed they were facing partisans or local hunters, not trained military marksmen. At Narvik and along the Björkvik approaches, these camouflaged marksmen delayed German advances by hours, sometimes days. They harassed supply lines, eliminated officers, and vanished before counter-fire arrived. For every man they killed, they bought time for evacuation, regrouping, or retreat. British officers observing these engagements began to understand the full tactical transformation at play. A sniper who could not be seen became more than a weapon. He became a psychological force. German patrols grew cautious, slowing their movements, scanning every patch of ground in terror of the unseen. One invisible man could hold back a company. In later reports, a Norwegian officer described watching a British sniper crawl across open snow for 20 yards, completely undetected. A white ripple in the wind, he wrote, until the shot came. That rifleman wore a suit built from Crichton's original design, adjusted for Arctic light. But Norway was only the beginning. The war was spreading south toward France, where visibility, camouflage, and survival would again collide in deadly perfection. France, May 1940. The British Expeditionary Force was retreating toward Dunkirk. Chaos ruled the countryside. Columns of smoke, shattered vehicles, and soldiers scattered through the hedgerows. Among them moved the British snipers, their ghillie suits darkened by mud and soot, blending almost perfectly with the scorched terrain. At this stage, the suits were no longer experimental. They were battlefield tools, crude, handmade, but effective beyond expectation. Reports from the retreat describe German units halted or misled by unseen marksmen firing from tree lines and drainage ditches. Small teams, often no more than 2 men, used Crichton's netting patterns to remain invisible even under direct search. One officer later wrote that, "Our snipers became like smoke, there, then gone." In the narrow fields near Castle, a group of British and French soldiers used ghillie tactics to cover a vital withdrawal route. They eliminated German machine gunners, pinning down retreating infantry, buying crucial minutes for evacuation convoys to pass. When the counterattack came, the Germans found no bodies, only scattered scraps of netting and the lingering sense of being watched. The suit's impact went beyond its physical concealment. It altered the enemy's confidence. Wehrmacht troops began firing at bushes, shadows, even empty fields, wasting ammunition and time. Panic spread easily when one could no longer trust the eyes. That invisible fear, the uncertainty of what was real, was Crichton's unintended weapon. For the British command, these moments were revelation. Sniping was no longer a niche skill. It was an art of control, fear, and precision. And behind it all lay the handiwork of a man who once fitted wigs for actors, the man whose weaving had now saved countless lives. By the time the last British units evacuated from Dunkirk, the ghillie suit had earned its place in the new doctrine of concealment warfare. What began as an eccentric experiment in a Scottish workshop had become a silent symbol of survival, and soon its legend would spread across every front of the war. After Dunkirk, Britain braced for invasion. The Home Guard was formed, the coasts fortified, and the army reorganized. Within that restructuring, a quiet recognition took shape, the importance of concealment and fieldcraft. What the Norwegian and French campaigns had revealed was undeniable. Invisibility could be engineered, taught, and standardized. By 1941, sniper schools across Britain began incorporating Crichton's techniques into official training. The original hand-woven ghillies were too labor-intensive for mass issue, but the principles, irregular patterning, natural texture, and adaptive coloration, became the foundation of camouflage doctrine. Military tailors simplified his method, using lighter nets, jute, and local vegetation to craft practical combat versions. Even so, every sniper still customized his suit, making each one unique, a personal signature of survival. Instructors from the Scottish regiments, particularly the Lovat Scouts, became the guardians of this knowledge. These men had been hunters and stalkers long before they were soldiers. Now, they were training others in the art of disappearance. The Lovat Scouts' motto, "By skill and valor," found new meaning as their expertise shaped the British sniper corps that would serve across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Meanwhile, James Crichton returned to Edinburgh, his name known only within military circles. He continued producing netting patterns and teaching new camouflage designers, but his contributions remained unofficial, buried in wartime secrecy. He never sought recognition, and few outside his unit knew the civilian wigmaker who had reshaped the way men vanished on the battlefield. As British and Commonwealth forces advanced through North Africa and later Italy, the ghillie principle adapted once more. In the desert, soldiers used sand-stained cloth. In the olive groves, sun-bleached rope. The essence of Crichton's design endured: break the pattern, confuse the eye, survive. By mid-war, the ghillie suit was no longer an oddity. It had become a quiet standard, a handmade weapon of patience and deception that no industrial process could truly replicate. As the war expanded, the ghillie suit's silent revolution spread beyond Britain's borders. Allied sniper programs in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand all adopted variants of Crichton's irregular patterning. Each nation modified the design to match its environment, from dense jungles to snow-covered ridges. But the philosophy remained constant: chaos conceals, order reveals. In North Africa, British snipers used lighter, sand-colored meshes to hide in the dunes around El Alamein. Their German counterparts, bound to factory-made camouflage, often stood out against the shifting tones of desert dust. In Italy, Canadian and British sharpshooters turned vineyards and hedgerows into living cover. Veterans later recalled German patrols passing within meters of hidden Allied marksmen, unaware that death waited only a breath away. By 1944, American forces, too, began integrating ghillie-style camouflage into their sniper programs. U.S. instructors studied British and Commonwealth methods carefully, documenting the irregular layering, the natural blending, and even the psychological training behind it. These lessons would later influence generations of modern snipers, from Vietnam to Afghanistan. James Crighton, however, never saw his invention's global legacy. After 1945, he returned quietly to civilian life, reopening his small shop in Edinburgh. He crafted wigs once more for actors, never boasting of the strange intersection his craft had found with warfare. To those who asked, he would only say, it was a matter of helping men stay unseen. In declassified reports decades later, his name appeared briefly in camouflage development notes filed under consulting specialist. There was no medal, no official mention, yet his contribution lived on in every sniper who crawled unseen across enemy soil. The ghillie suit had outgrown its origin. What began as strands of burlap and patience had evolved into a philosophy of invisibility, one that reshaped how armies thought about sight, movement, and survival. And though the war ended, the idea endured, that the smallest craftsman's touch could alter the fate of men in the largest of wars. In every war, innovation often comes from places no one expects: a factory, a laboratory, or in this case, a quiet whir. In a shop above a theater in Edinburgh, James Crighton never held command, never fired a shot in anger, and yet his understanding of light, texture, and illusion shaped the lives of countless soldiers. His ghillie netting did not roar like an engine or explode like a shell. It whispered softly in the language of survival. The ghillie suit remains one of the few pieces of military technology that cannot be perfectly mechanized. Machines can print camouflage, but they cannot reproduce randomness, that living, organic imperfection that Crichton understood so well. It was the randomness of nature that saved lives on battlefields from Narvik to Normandy. In time, modern armies would refine the idea with advanced fibers, thermal masking, and digital patterns. Yet the heart of it, the principle that chaos conceals, still carries the mark of a man who once made wigs for actors, a man who turned deception from performance into protection. In the end, his creation became something larger than war itself, a quiet testament to the strange humanity that exists even in conflict. That in the darkest moments of history, survival can depend not only on courage and firepower, but on craftsmanship, patience, and the humble artistry of one man's hands. James Crichton never sought glory, but every time a sniper fades into the landscape, unseen, unheard, untouched, his legacy moves again through the wind and the grass.